how God is growing you even when you don't feel it. Growth does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly without milestones or moments that feel important. Days pass, routines repeat, prayers feel ordinary, and life seems unchanged. You keep showing up, doing what you know is right, trusting God in small ways, yet you wonder if anything is actually happening. It can feel like you are standing still, like faith is steady but not moving forward. And in those seasons, doubt whispers that maybe you are not growing at all. But Scripture reveals a different truth. God often does His deepest work in places you cannot measure, and in ways you cannot immediately feel. While you are focused on surviving the day, God is shaping your heart. While you are waiting for clarity, God is strengthening your trust. While you are praying the same prayers again and again, God is forming endurance, humility, and faith beneath the surface. Growth with God is rarely loud. It is slow, intentional, and deeply personal. The Bible compares spiritual growth to seeds planted in the ground. The soil looks unchanged for a long time. Nothing appears to be happening. But beneath the surface, roots are forming, foundations are strengthening, and life is preparing to break through. If the seed could speak, it might believe nothing was happening at all. Yet every unseen moment is essential for what will eventually be seen. God works the same way in you. There are seasons when obedience feels repetitive, when faith feels quiet, when progress feels invisible. But those are the seasons when God is doing the most. He is reshaping how you respond instead of what you face. He is softening your heart, sharpening your discernment, deepening your dependence on Him. You may not notice it day by day, but one day you will look back and realize you are no longer who you used to be. This message is for anyone who feels overlooked, unchanged, or unsure if growth is happening at all. You are not stagnant. You are not forgotten. God is growing you in ways that will last, in ways that do not fade, and in ways that prepare you for what comes next. Even when you don't notice it, even when it feels slow, even when it feels silent, God is still at work within you. Number 1, God grows you through ordinary faithfulness. One of the most overlooked ways God grows you is through faithfulness that feels ordinary. Not dramatic breakthroughs, not life-altering moments, but the quiet discipline of showing up again and again, reading Scripture when it doesn't feel exciting, choosing integrity when no one is watching, praying short, honest prayers in the middle of busy days. These moments rarely feel powerful, yet they are some of God's favorite tools for transformation. The Bible is clear that growth with God is often gradual. Jesus spoke about seeds growing slowly in the soil, unnoticed day by day. The farmer does not stand over the ground watching for progress. He trusts the process. In the same way, God grows you through repeated obedience. Every small yes shapes your heart. Every faithful step trains your spirit. What feels insignificant today is building spiritual strength for tomorrow. Ordinary faithfulness teaches consistency. It trains you to obey God not because of emotion, reward, or recognition, but because He is worthy. This kind of obedience changes your inner life. It forms character. It builds trust. It anchors you in truth rather than feelings. Over time, you begin responding differently to stress, temptation, and disappointment. Not because you tried harder, but because God has been quietly reshaping you. God also uses routine to deepen intimacy. When faith is no longer dependent on excitement, it becomes rooted. You learn to walk with God in the mundane, in work, responsibilities, relationships, and rest. You begin to recognize His presence in ordinary moments. This kind of growth is subtle, but it lasts. It produces stability instead of fluctuation, depth instead of impulse. You may not feel like you are changing, but faithfulness is doing its work. One day you will notice that patience has grown, that peace comes easier, that wisdom guides your choices, and you will realize it did not happen overnight. It happened through ordinary days, surrendered to God. Growth you don't notice is often the growth that stays. Number 2, God grows you through waiting and delay. Waiting is one of the most uncomfortable places of growth, especially because it rarely feels productive. You pray, you hope, you prepare, yet nothing seems to move. Answers are delayed. Direction feels unclear. Progress appears slow. And it is easy to assume that waiting means nothing is happening. But in the Bible, waiting is never empty. It is formative. God often uses delay to strengthen what cannot be built quickly. Waiting develops patience, but more importantly, it develops trust. When outcomes are postponed, you are forced to rely on God rather than results. You learn to rest without resolution. You learn to obey without immediate reward. This kind of faith is deep and resilient because it is no longer dependent on circumstances. In seasons of waiting, God works on your inner posture. He reshapes expectations. He exposes impatience. He softens areas of control. You begin to realize how much of your peace was tied to timing rather than trust. Slowly, God teaches you to wait with hope instead of anxiety. Not passive waiting, but faithful waiting, continuing to do what is right even when nothing changes outwardly. The Bible shows that waiting often precedes growth. Abraham waited years for a promise. David waited to become king. Joseph waited through injustice and silence. What God was doing in them during the wait mattered as much as what he would eventually do through them. Waiting refined their character so they could carry what was coming. You may not notice growth while waiting, because growth is happening beneath the surface. Roots are deepening. Faith is strengthening. Dependence is increasing. One day the waiting will lift, and you will realize you are more prepared, more grounded, and more spiritually mature than before. God was growing you all along, even when it felt like nothing was happening at all. Number 3, God grows you through discomfort and stretching. Some of the deepest growth God produces happens in moments that feel uncomfortable, unfamiliar, and even unsettling. Comfort rarely changes us. It preserves what already exists. But growth requires stretching, being asked to live, think, respond, and trust beyond what feels natural. God often grows you by leading you into spaces where your faith must expand to survive. Discomfort shows up when God asks more of you than you feel ready to give. A new responsibility, a difficult obedience, a season where old strategies no longer work. You may feel exposed, inadequate, or unsure, but these moments are not signs that you are failing. They are signs that God is increasing your capacity. Just as muscles grow under tension, faith grows when it is stretched beyond ease. In Scripture, God repeatedly stretched people before strengthening them. Peter was stretched beyond fear. Moses was stretched beyond insecurity. Esther was stretched beyond safety. God does not stretch to harm. He stretches to prepare. Discomfort reveals dependence. It exposes where you rely on yourself instead of God. And in that exposure, God invites deeper trust. This kind of growth often feels slow because it happens internally. You may not notice change right away, but over time you begin responding differently. What once intimidated you no longer paralyzes you. What once overwhelmed you no longer defines you. Courage grows quietly. Faith becomes steadier. You realize that discomfort has been training ground, not punishment. God also uses stretching to detach you from familiarity. He gently loosens your grip on what is known so you can receive what is next. This can feel unsettling, but it is necessary. Growth requires movement, and movement requires leaving something behind. God grows you by expanding your willingness to follow Him into unknown places. If you are feeling stretched right now, do not assume something is wrong. Growth often feels like tension, before it feels like strength. God is enlarging your faith, widening your trust, and preparing you for greater depth. And one day, what once felt uncomfortable will feel natural, because God has grown you through it. Number 4. God grows you through relationships and people. One of the most surprising ways God grows you is through people. Not just encouraging relationships, but challenging ones. God often uses interactions with others to shape humility, patience, forgiveness, and love in ways that isolation never could. Growth through relationships is subtle, emotional, and often difficult to recognize while it is happening. People expose parts of you that circumstances cannot. They reveal pride, insecurity, fear, impatience, control. God uses these moments not to condemn you, but to refine you. When someone tests your patience, God is growing endurance. When someone hurts you, God is growing forgiveness. When someone challenges you, God is shaping wisdom and humility. Even healthy relationships are tools of growth. Accountability sharpens discernment. Community teaches selflessness. Encouragement strengthens perseverance. God uses people to remind you that faith is not lived alone. Growth happens in the tension between loving others well and allowing God to change you through that love. Difficult relationships, though painful, often produce the deepest growth. God teaches you how to love without conditions, how to forgive without minimizing pain, and how to set boundaries without hardening your heart. These lessons shape character quietly and gradually. You may not notice growth until you realize you no longer react the way you once did. God also grows you by removing or changing relationships. Letting go teaches trust. Separation teaches identity. Loss teaches dependence. These changes create space for deeper maturity and alignment with God's will. Growth often looks like loss before it looks like gain. If people are stretching you right now, God may be growing you through them. Relationships are classrooms for faith. Through them, God teaches you how to reflect His love, wisdom, and grace. And often you will not realize how much you have grown until you look back and see how differently you now love, respond, and trust. Number 5. God grows you through loss, change, and letting go. Some of the most meaningful growth God brings happens through loss. Loss of seasons, relationships, expectations, or versions of yourself you thought would last forever. Loss is painful because it exposes attachment. It reveals what we depended on for security, identity, or comfort. But according to Scripture, God often uses loss not to diminish you, but to deepen you. Letting go creates space for growth that holding on never could. Change forces surrender. When familiar structures fall away, you are invited to lean more fully on God. In these moments, faith becomes personal rather than inherited, intentional rather than assumed. You learn that God is not just present in what remains, but also in what is removed. Loss strips away illusions of control and invites trust at a deeper level. The Bible shows this pattern repeatedly. Abraham had to let go of his homeland. Ruth had to let go of her past. The disciples had to leave what was familiar to follow Jesus. God rarely builds new things on top of old foundations that no longer fit. Growth often requires release before renewal. Letting go also reshapes identity. When old roles or expectations end, you are forced to rediscover who you are in God rather than in circumstance. This can feel unsettling, but it is deeply formative. God uses transition to realign your heart, refine your priorities, and strengthen your dependence on Him alone. You may not recognize growth while grieving or adjusting. Pain often clouds perspective, but over time you begin to notice deeper resilience, clearer faith, and greater freedom. Loss teaches you to hold life loosely and God firmly, and that posture produces lasting maturity. God grows you through letting go by teaching you that His presence is enough. What leaves you is not always what defines you. What remains, faith, hope, trust, becomes stronger than before. Growth through loss is quiet, painful, and powerful, and often you only realize how much you have grown once healing has already begun. Number 6. God grows you through silence and stillness. One of the most confusing seasons of growth is when God feels silent. Prayers seem unanswered. Direction feels unclear. The emotional reassurance you once felt is gone. Silence can feel like absence. But biblically, silence is often an invitation to deeper intimacy. God grows you in stillness by teaching you how to listen rather than rush. Silence strips away distractions. When noise fades, your heart becomes more aware. You begin to notice what you used to avoid: fear, doubt, longing, dependence. God does not speak less in silence. He speaks differently. He invites reflection, patience, and trust. Stillness slows your pace so your roots can grow deeper. In Scripture, God often met people in quiet places. Elijah heard God in a whisper. Jesus withdrew to lonely places to pray. Growth in silence teaches discernment. You learn to distinguish God's voice from your own expectations. Faith matures when it no longer relies on constant affirmation. Stillness also reveals motivation. When there is no immediate feedback, obedience becomes pure. You seek God not for answers alone, but for relationship. Prayer becomes less about speaking and more about being present. Scripture becomes nourishment rather than noise. You may not feel like you are growing in silent seasons, but later you will notice increased clarity, deeper peace, and stronger faith. You respond more thoughtfully. You trust more steadily. God was shaping your inner life while your outer life felt unchanged. Silence is not God withholding himself. It is God inviting you closer. Growth in stillness is slow, subtle, and sacred, and often it is in quiet seasons that God forms the strongest faith. Number 7. God grows you before you are aware of the fruit. One of the most humbling truths about spiritual growth is that you often recognize it only in hindsight. While you are living it, growth feels slow, uneven, and unremarkable. But later, sometimes much later, you realize that something fundamental has changed. Your reactions are calmer. Your faith is steadier. Your choices are wiser. You are not trying as hard to be different, yet you are different. God grew you long before you noticed the fruit. The Bible teaches that growth begins in hidden places. Roots form before branches appear. Strength develops before responsibility increases. God works quietly so that growth is genuine, not performative. If change were always obvious, pride would grow faster than humility. So God often matures you in ways that bypass your awareness, shaping who you are rather than what you show. You begin to notice the fruit, not through achievements, but through responses. You handle disappointment with grace instead of bitterness. You face uncertainty with peace instead of panic. You forgive more freely. You trust more deeply. These shifts rarely come with celebration, yet they are evidence of God's work. Growth has become part of you, not something you put on. God also grows you by changing what no longer dominates you. Old temptations lose their grip. Old fears lose their authority. Old habits fade quietly. You don't always remember when the change happened. You only know that it did. God was faithful in the unseen moments, the ordinary days, the quiet prayers, and the silent waiting. This kind of growth is lasting because it is rooted in truth rather than emotion. It doesn't depend on circumstances or feelings. It sustains you through seasons of abundance and scarcity alike. God grows you in ways that will hold when life shifts again. If you feel unsure whether you are growing, look gently at who you are becoming. God's work is often subtle, but it is never shallow. He is growing you, even now, patiently, purposefully, lovingly, long before the fruit becomes visible to you or anyone else. Conclusion: growing even when you don't see it. There are seasons when faith feels quiet and progress feels invisible. You show up, you pray, you try to remain faithful. Yet nothing seems to change. But Scripture assures us that God's work is not measured by how it feels. It is measured by how faithfully He completes what He begins. Growth with God is not always dramatic, but it is always intentional. God grows you through ordinary obedience, waiting, discomfort, relationships, loss, silence, and unseen transformation. He uses what feels small, slow, and unnoticed to build something strong, deep, and enduring. While you are focused on surviving, God is shaping your character. While you are waiting for change, God is strengthening your trust. While you are wondering if anything is happening, God is forming who you are becoming. You are not stagnant. You are not overlooked. You are not behind. Growth does not always feel like progress, but it is still progress. God is more patient than you are, more faithful than you can imagine, and more invested in your growth than you will ever be. If you are in a season when nothing seems to be changing, do not lose heart. Trust the process. Trust the gardener. Seeds grow in darkness before they break the surface. Roots deepen before fruit appears. God is working in you right now, even if you cannot see it yet. Take a moment to pray and thank God for the growth you cannot measure but can trust. Ask Him to help you remain faithful in the quiet seasons and to recognize His work in time. If this message encouraged you, like the video, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who may feel discouraged by slow or unseen growth. God is growing you, even when you don't notice it, and what He is forming in you will last.